and what a crescendo we have for you. Before I introduce tonight's special guest, I'd like to share with you a little bit about the work being done by the President's Anti-Racism Task Force at Acadia, as PART. A full report was presented by this task force mid-year of 2021. In December, Dr. Ricketts, our president, who is with us this evening, thank you for joining us, Dr. Ricketts, issued a response to the report saying, in responding to the PART report, it is important that Acadia uses this moment in time to create real and lasting change. This means making strategic changes to how we make decisions, how we plan and coordinate our activities, and how we hold ourselves accountable for making progress towards our institutional goals and aspirations, end quote. Each and every conversation that we have assists us on our journey towards truth and reconciliation and anti-racism. My name is Una Proudfoot, and I'm the Executive Director of Alumni Affairs in the Office of Advancement at Acadia, and I'm delighted to be joined here this evening with the Honourable Dr. Donald Oliver, class of 1960 and honorary doctorate of 2007. Dr. Oliver has been a lawyer, professor, farmer, business person, author, Cordon Bleu Chef, and senator, who rose to serve with distinction as Deputy Speaker in the Senate of Canada, as Chair of 6 standing committees of Parliament, Chair or Deputy Chair of 7 inter-parliamentary associations, and as an ubiquitous spokesperson for diversity, pluralism, fairness, and equality. Author of the book, A Matter of Equality, the very first book in our Alumni Association book club, and perhaps most importantly, proud Wolfville born and member of the Acadia alumni community. We are also joined by University President and Vice Chancellor Dr. Peter Ricketts, as I said, former Chancellor Libby Burnham and classmate of Dr. Oliver, Councillor Jennifer Ingham of the town of Wolfville. We also have several Board of Governors with us this evening, past and present, and Alumni Association Board of Director, several deans, and alumni whom I haven't seen in a long time. And I do look forward to being able to come and see you in person very soon. We welcome engagement in this conversation through asking questions and ask that you either raise your virtual hand or post your questions or comments in the chat function, and I'll keep an eye on it. We've entered your names into a draw and will announce the winner at the end of the discussion, and the winner will receive a copy of Dr. Oliver's book, A Matter of Equality. Welcome to you all, and welcome Dr. Oliver. It is both a pleasure and an honor to have you with us this evening. I understand that you've had upwards of 20 speaking engagements this month, and we are privileged that you have saved the best for last. I'd like to offer the floor to you, sir, to share with us your opening comments and thoughts.
Well, thank you very, very much. And thank you for that kind introduction. I'm really so happy to be here tonight. It warms my heart to see so many old friends who have pre-registered. I'm back home where my childhood was spent and where my family house and gardens were, where I went through the Wolfville school system, and as a student at Acadia, where those 5 formative years set the foundation for the intriguingly difficult 55 years of advocacy around the globe that followed. The academic foundation learned at Acadia helped me to become a change agent as I wrestled the countless racist obstacles to the fair advancement of Canadians of African descent. Acadia taught me some of the grace and patience required to fight anti-Black systemic racism for nearly 2 generations. I am 5th generation Canadian, and my great-grandparents on both my maternal and paternal sides were slaves on plantations in America, in Virginia and Maryland, tobacco plantations. Both sets of my grandparents served Acadia University with honor and pride in various capacities for more than a century. Our family DNA was education, 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 and become a change agent that continuously gives back to the community and to our country. Tonight marks the end of the 2022 Black History Month, Black Heritage Month in this province. I want to challenge you, without reading from my book, A Matter of Equality, on what Black History Month really means, where it should be going, and just what it was like for me to grow up in small town Wolfville in the 1940s and the 1950s, and what systemic challenges still face you today. I was standing in front of the duck pond on Main Street in Wolfville on a warm summer Sunday in 1956, having finished a weekend visit with my parents. I had my thumb out to passing cars as I had done before, hitchhiking my way back to work in Halifax for my student summer job as a cub reporter at the Chronicle Herald. Several cars passed. Some, through hand and arm movements as they passed, indicated that their vehicle was regretfully full and they could not take me. Suddenly, a red car veered over close to where I was standing. The passenger rolled down the window, spat at me and yelled, "Get off the road, nigger." The words still whistle and ring painfully through my head 66 years later as I speak to you tonight. That and other face-to-face encounters with anti-Black systemic racism in my early years alerted me to the fact that I was different from 99% of other Canadians. It frankly made me pause and come to the stark realization that my Blackness alone, just my Blackness, was a negative reality that was never going to go away, and that for me to succeed, I must learn to transcend it. I could not let my Blackness hold me back from finding ways, with the belief in the essential dignity and humanity of all people, to challenge white barbers in Halifax who would not cut my hair, restaurants and cafes that would not serve Negro people. My sister was married to a surgeon and he had done something pretty special, and I took them to a restaurant in Quinpool Road in Halifax to celebrate. We all were dressed up in our suits and clothes, ties, and we sat there and sat there. They would not serve us, and finally they came over. "You Negroes can sit there as long as you like. We don't serve people like you in our restaurant." Billiards halls that refused the entrance to Negroes. Landlords who would not rent apartments to Black people. Municipalities with bylaws prohibiting the burial of Black people in their cemeteries. It happened in the 1960s when I was on the NSAACP. A Black baby had died and they wanted to bury it in St. Croix, about 18 miles from Wolfville. And in 1907, there was a bylaw, a municipal bylaw, one of a kind, that was put on the books, and it said Black people cannot be buried here. It was not until our protests in 1960 that that was taken off the books in Nova Scotia, that Black people could not be buried in their cemetery. These racist activities, practices, and prohibitions that had been ingrained and ongoing for centuries had a demeaning effect on the soul, the heart, and the mind of Black folk. As one writer said, we were a subordinated inferior status in society, where we were treated as lowly animals, not to be housed properly or given adequate medical services, and by no means not a decent education, with segregated schools prevalent throughout Nova Scotia. These have, with many other classic indicia of race hatred, caused Blacks over the centuries to lose confidence and doubt themselves and their worth as a human being. These doubts became the seeds of a pernicious and group hatred manifested by our loss of respect for ourselves, our peers, and our community. Malcolm X said, "America's greatest crime against the Black man was not slavery or lynching, but that he was taught to wear a mask of self-hate and self-doubt." This is all amplified by the doctrine of white privilege, a societal privilege, a perk that benefits all white people with white skin. It denotes that all things in our society are judged by white standards, and this privilege affects the entire functioning of our national subconscious. Black people are dominated by this privilege. In Soul on Ice, Eldridge Cleaver posed this question: how do you identify a Black soul that has been colonized by an oppressive white society that projects its brief, narrow vision of life as eternal truth? Or as James Baldwin put it in The Fire Next Time, white people cannot, in generality, be taken as models of how to live. They are out of touch with themselves and in sore need of new standards. We are not yet emancipated. We need to create a new culture. Bell Hook, who just died in 3 years ago now, used the killing rage of racism as a manner of developing critical race consciousness. We have to know and understand our souls, our own Black souls. It's not easy because a soul is a spiritual principle, but one that has a special uniqueness with the Black man. In 1903, W.E. Du Bois wrote, quote, Souls of Black Folk, a powerful book that has been read by tens of thousands of people around the world. Its message touches us in post-colonial Canada in 2022. Du Bois says that Black people, because of how we have been socialized, must have two fields of vision at the same time. One, a consciousness of how we view ourselves as a person, and two, a consciousness of how the world views us. These are the existential determinants of Black self-consciousness. Like the development of the id and the ego, the journey of Black self-awareness post-slavery changed the child of emancipation to the youth of dawning, self-consciousness, self-realization, and self-respect. Du Bois, in his groundbreaking book, said that this existential predicament expressed itself like this. And he uses the word veil, and the veil is that thin little piece of thread that differentiates between white and Black, discrimination, prejudice, and where the two cross. And so he says this, that he left the white world through a veil. And in those somber forests of his striving, his own soul rose before him, and he saw himself. Some faint revelation of his power and of his mission. This apparition was based on folkways, Black folkways, taken from the stories, harsh existence, food, music, the severe lashes and beatings, struggle, and the pain of slavery. They all made up the Black soul. You need to have felt it. So today, 3.5 million people of African descent in Canada must dig into our past, look at ourselves in the present, and look forward to the future and redefine ourselves as worthy equals in our society and make life in Canada about a matter of equality. We are struggling to be liberated from this domination, but Bell Hook, that famous writer, reminds us that if we are to move forward, we must confront the legacy of our unreconciled grief, because it has been the breeding ground for profound nihilistic despair. In one of her most powerful books, Killing Rage, Ending Racism, she said in the first of her 23 essays that the fierce anger of Black people, stung by repeated instances of everyday racism, could find in that rage a healing source of love and strength, and a catalyst to positive change. But in Love as the Practice of Freedom, another book, she explained to us that love provides the exit to our dilemma. Without love, our efforts to liberate ourselves and our world community from oppression and exploitation, the result of white privilege, doomed. She says that without love, we will not be able to create a culture of conversion where there is a mass turning away from an ethic of domination. For Blacks, February has become one of the most important months of the calendar year because it is when all of our communications, technology, radio, TV, blogs, podcasts, social media is engaged to showcase and highlight many of the outstanding achievements of some of our 3.5 million Canadians of African descent. It's when we showcase the incredible strength of our visual and performing arts, our music and new artists, literature, poetry, dance, and fashion design, to mention only a few. But it is equally important as the time that we read about, study, and highlight the struggles, the history, and the careers of those who, for the last 400 years, pushed aside and crushed many anti-Black systemic barriers and have thereby helped to open the doorway for thousands of us who followed. It is a month of awakening, celebration, and pride as we commemorate the achievements and the legacy of many outstanding Black Canadians like Lincoln Alexander, Viola Desmond, and Portia White. Most importantly for our youth, it is a time to reimagine what possibilities lie ahead in this month of renewed appreciation of Blackness that stresses the beauty and the diversity of our people and how our Blackness permeates all aspects of Canadian society in parallel with and often surpassing white privilege. It is a visual demonstration of the growing strength and power of the Black presence in Canada. And for you on the Acadia Zoom tonight, you may ask, what are some other ways that we can honor the contributions that Black Canadians make in all sectors of Canadian society? Well, to begin with, we should celebrate their successes and achievements when we use all of our efforts to elevate them to positions like chair and vice chair or lead director of Canada's largest crown corporations and boards, and deans, presidents, vice presidents, and chancellors of Canadian universities. We have to ensure that we have a significant presence at all national historical and cultural events, often as major participants or presiding chairs. Ensure that libraries in all of our schools and colleges across Canada have current, updated, bilingual books that accurately recount the history of the enormous contributions Blacks have made to enhancing Canada both nationally and internationally. We must make the celebration of Black history and accomplishments and the time when we give visibility to Black people and groups creating positive change, a 12-month affair. The Public Service of Canada has chosen this year's theme for Black History Month as February and Forever, celebrating Black history today and every day. I could not agree more. Extending our history display 12 months will provide an opportunity to nationally devote 1 month, for instance, to commemorating groups like scientists and inventors. The Kaizo gene from Dr. Juliette Daniel, a Black doctor in Ontario. The potato chip, the microphone, automatic doors, steroids, synthetic cortisone, birth control pills, etc., were all created and invented by Black men and women. It's time we knew more about them. We could have another month highlighting our Olympic medalists, Another for famous Black athletes in basketball, football, baseball, hockey, boxing. Another month for higher education, our award-winning Canadian professors, trailblazing meteorologists, robot engineers, astrophysicists, climatologists, medicine, dentistry, law. Yes, we have excelled in all those categories and fields, and that is why the study and understanding of Black history must be extended to be 12 months of the year. Let me end by throwing out this challenge to you that was said 100 years ago by Dubois. Only by a union of intelligence and sympathy across the color line is veiled. In this critical period of the Republic shall justice and right triumph. Only by a union of intelligence and sympathy across the color line in this critical period of the Republic shall justice and right triumph, said 100 years ago. Well, thank you very, very much for giving me this opportunity to give you a few views on Black History Month.
Thank you so much, Dr. Oliver. And I believe what the youth of today say is mic drop. And that means we've just dropped the microphone. You have covered for us so eloquently in your opening remarks, education, politics, religion, literature, spirituality, history, psychology, cultural arts, and you've touched on advocacy, being a change agent, systemic racism, giving back to our country, and representation and the necessity of it in all aspects of our society. You've given us a lot to think about already, and I thank you for that. We have a number of questions, Dr. Oliver, that have been sent in by people who have registered for this evening's session. I have them in front of me, and I'm going to, I guess, interview you in a sense. Again, I'll just reiterate for folks who have just joined us that if you have a question or a comment, please, please, please share it in the chat function. Or if you would like to engage your video and your microphone, just raise your virtual hand and I'll call on you. In the meantime, I will work through some of the questions that were submitted from our attendees this evening in an attempt to glean from you everything we can in this very short hour that we have with you. And I tell you what, Dawn, I'm going to start with an easy one. How about that? Now, this comes from somebody who hasn't read your book yet, I'm going to guess, because the answer to this question is in your book, and I probably will drop a few little cliffhangers throughout the conversation so that folks know that there's a lot of great fodder to cover in your book. And the question is, what brought you to Acadia University for your education?
Well, I was born in Wolfville, and my father was born in Wolfville, and his father was born in Wolfville. And my father built the house that I lived on in University Avenue in the early 1920s. So it was easy to go to Acadia after Wolfville High School, just trip down the street.
And you share several very picturesque stories in your book about your experiences in Wolfville. So for folks on the line who haven't read it yet, I encourage you to. Now, I said I was going to start with an easy one. Now I'm going to segue right into getting right down to the meat of the matter, if you will. And a question that was submitted is, what was the greatest challenge you faced? And what do you consider to be your greatest accomplishment since you graduated from Acadia?
I think the greatest challenge was finding ways to move the yardsticks. And it was like some of the books of Kafka, The Trial, you know, and you would open a door and it closes behind you, and you open another and it closes it. And it was like that with me trying to move the yardsticks. So that was really the biggest challenge, no matter whether it was in law, in community work, or in the Senate, or in diplomacy. It was hard to move the yardsticks. So that was the biggest challenge, but I did find some ways.
And your greatest accomplishment since Acadia?
Look, I like having some fun. One of the great accomplishments is that I became a Cordon Bleu chef because I like food and I like cooking. And I wrote a cookbook that was a success. And I studied at the Cordon Bleu in London, and I studied in Italy and other places. And I used to use my cooking as a way of giving back to the community by hosting dinners and raising money for various charities like autism, like Neptune Theatre, and many Black causes. That was one of the things. Other things that were achievements. I played a major role in making February Black History Month, because in order for the Parliament of Canada to speak, both the House of Commons and the Senate have to pass a resolution. And there was no resolution in the Senate until I put one before it, saying I'd like to have February as Black History Month and as a time when we celebrate all of the great contributions of Black people in Canada. My motion passed unanimously, and on that day, that was one of the great achievements. The second great achievement was getting the $500,000 study that I arranged with the conference board done on barriers to the advancement of visible minorities in both the public and the private sectors. And that report really changed thinking in Canada, both in the private and the public sector. And major corporations that read the report and applied many of the things, and so also did the public service. So that was a major achievement.
Thank you for that. And I have a couple of sub-questions from your response. The first one, well, it's not so much a question, but it's to let folks know that that cookbook that you wrote, I'm going to let them know the name of it, Don, if that's okay. And if I understand it correctly, it was a bit of a joke between you and your sister. I'm not sure if it was Jeannie or Shirley, but if I have that correct, and the book is Men Can Cook Too.
Yeah.
So I'm currently trying to get my hands on a copy of that. So, Dr. Oliver, when you talked about your challenges, you talked about doors opening and doors closing, and you talked about moving yardsticks. And then you go on to tell us a couple of your greatest accomplishments, which are incredible. What advice would you give or could you give for those of us who are interested in being change agents and allies and interested in affecting change when a door closes and when a yardstick doesn't seem to want to move? Where did you go to get the passion and the energy to keep going?
Part of it came from goodwill from some white people who were friends of mine, who did not see color when they looked at me, but they saw someone who wanted to create and help produce a more tolerant Canada, and they wanted to get on board. And they would go arm in arm with me, figuratively, in finding ways to move that barrier. So I had a lot of good friends and a lot of help, and I was certainly not alone. And all of my help was not Black. A lot of my help came from right-minded white people from many different sectors of society. And it was like the George Floyd murder and killing in real time. When people saw it around the world, they said, my goodness, what about being human and treating a human as a human? This has got to stop. We've got to do something about it. We've got to stand up now and take a stand and say, this has got to stop. Well, that's that incident was like some of the incidents that occurred when I was working with many friends over 50 years.
I went back to the quote that you referenced, or one of the quotes that you referenced in your opening remarks, Dr. Oliver, when you talked about intelligence and sympathy, and when those two come together, that's when justice and righteousness will triumph. We have a question in the chat function, so I'll veer away from the list that I have in front of me because I do want to make sure that I acknowledge all the questions that we have from our attendees this evening. And this comes to us from Ted Upshaw, who is a current director of the Alumni Association Board. He says, Dr. Oliver, thank you for what you have done for Black people, not only in Nova Scotia, but in Canada. You stated it was hard to move the yardstick. What was your biggest wall?
I think that major corporations did not want to have Blacks on their boards. And you can understand it because those same corporations did not want women on their boards for years and years. And you recall the quotation from one of the largest CEO of one of the largest companies in Canada just a few years ago. If there were a woman who were competent, she would be on our board, but there are none that are competent. Well, blacks face the same problem. So it's been hard because it's extremely important that there be eminent, qualified blacks in senior positions, like presidents of universities, chiefs of police, and CEOs of major corporations. And the reason for that is that Canadians have to see that blacks are able to do these jobs. And the better example is to have black judges. When all of the bench is white, it's easy to say, well, it's white because most of the black people are in jail. They're still out committing crimes. And, and none of them are capable of being a judge. So when you have blacks on the benches and white people can see that they are capable of being just as good a judge as their neighbor who's white, that will help make a change. And that's one of the biggest things that has to change, getting eminent qualified blacks in senior positions. And about 6 or 7 months ago, I was talking with a very senior business person in Toronto who said that there was a company looking for an engineer who was black, but they couldn't find any. So this person said, I just happen to have a list that we've been collecting, and here's the list of over 6 eminently qualified black engineers who can do this job for you. On the oil patch, it happened to be, you know. And so we've got to find ways of getting that known.
So we come full circle back to your suggestion, or that it's an entire year, and each month we celebrate different vocations and different areas of Black success, right? Because that's through that awareness and through that knowledge, then we begin to learn where we have Black leaders, and able to do exactly as you're suggesting. So some of these questions are quite weighty, Dr. Oliver, so I certainly appreciate your time, and your thought as I pose these questions to you. The next question rather is, the work of anti-Black racism has been borne disproportionately by African Nova Scotians and other racialized communities. What are your top practical tips for good allyship? So when I asked you a previous question, you spoke that you had people who helped you, and some were Black, but many were white. So for those of us who are white, what are your top practical tips for good allyship?
Well, I talked about it tonight in the speech, and it was the heart of the speech. That is, you really have to get to know the soul of Black folk. And when white folk sit down with Black folk and open their hearts and learn about their souls, the spiritual soul that I talked about, that is the way you find an ally. We have, by talking, by saying, this is who I am, this is what I've gone through. And you remember that two of the writers that I quoted said that, you have to realize that there's a lot of hanging over from slavery in the past that's still a part of your psyche. And until you can get rid of that through love or something else, it's going to be difficult. So that's the kind of thing you share. And that sharing is what opens it up and makes that person a wonderful ally. And you can, as they do in Ethiopia, grab hands and walk together and help solve problems of the world.
When you say that, Dr. Oliver, I sheepishly admit to you that it wasn't very long ago that I learned what exactly first voice meant. And when I finally did stop and listen long enough for somebody to tell me and explain to me what first voice is, it really opened so many doors for me to listen to these stories and listen to these experiences of people of equity-seeking communities. So certainly understand that. And when we talk about you know, we have an hour with you this evening and that's it. And one of the things that you spoke of in your opening comments that I really, really want to encourage folks on the line to walk away with is a call to action and what it is that each and every one of us can do, leaving a conversation such as this one and contribute to moving forward and becoming allies and working towards anti-racism. Acadia has had a long history with the African Nova Scotian community as well as your own family. What has Acadia done well, historically or currently, to fight for equality? And how could Acadia continue to lead in seeking equality and justice?
I watched a show that you chaired earlier today with young Acadia students who were Black, who had different private experiences that they spoke about, and it's now on YouTube, on the internet. And it's never easy to have to talk about those things, but telling stories, opening up your hearts, and in the case of both sides, both white and Black, you have to talk about and disclose some of the negative stereotypes that you have of that person or that race, the white or the Black. And you've got to be prepared to sit down and explore those kinds of things. And you know, you have to be prepared to share. And that is never easy. So it's a difficult question, but it all gets down to when you are, one is Black and one is white, and they sit in the room, they're prepared to share, and they're prepared to look at the souls of the others, and they're prepared to look at some of the misconceptions that they've had of the others, then and only then can the process really be solved. You know, negative stereotypes have held Black people back since slavery. And I forget the name of the person who wrote the book on Black Power, but he lists the stereotypes that came from slavery, and they were used by white people in slavery to divide and conquer and keep the Black people back. To say you're lazy, you can't get an education, you like to dance, you're oversexed. All of these stereotypes were used negatively, and some of them still hang around, and they have got to be washed away and cleansed away ultimately by love. I must say, one other thing, I didn't have a chance to say it today, but the whole doctrine of love that is done, part of the essence of the recent writing of HAAWK before she died, is also followed very much by Martin Luther King in his early writings. And his was not just the love of God, but it was the same kind of humanitarian love that she spoke about. And that is the saving grace in our white-Black relations today. And that's the way that we are, in fact, through love, going to find a more tolerant Canadian society.
How appropriate that we speak of that in the month of Valentine's Day and the Day of Love as well. So hopefully it will permeate through all of this in the discussions that we're having. Folks on the line, I just want to encourage you, if you have a question, to drop it into the chat function. I'm going to ask a personal question of my own, if I may, Dr. Oliver. When I listen to you and I listen to your stories and your experiences, and when I read your book and have had a couple of conversations with you, my question to you is, and I'm kind of putting you on the spot by asking this, did you ever just get really mad and want to just lash out? And if so, how did you not? How do you remain so poised and diplomatic and educational when you answer a question or when you speak to someone?
I think it's because of my lifestyle. I always was more than a one-trick pony. And I tried not just to be running around the country saying that you're a racist and so on and stop being racist. So you can't do that. And so I had many other things that I was involved in and that I did. And you know, I really loved the countryside and I loved farming. I love cooking. I love the working in the community on various community activities, and I could go on I love the arts and classical music, and I love opera, and we used to go to the Met and so on. Then on all of those things would clear my head and let me come back and start anew. And so I think it was I had more than one interest.
That's terrific advice. Absolutely wonderful. I'm going to ask you one last question from the list that was submitted, and after that question, I'll ask Dr. Peter Ricketts to join us to bring some thanks to you for joining us this evening. And the last question that I'll pose to you, Dr. Oliver, is someone who's attending this evening wants to hear a little bit more about your musical interests and where that comes from.
Both sides of my family were musical, but particularly my mother's side. My mother was the first of 13 children from Reverend Dr. White, and my mother was a very brilliant pianist and studied in Halifax. And her sister, Portia White, had a wonderful voice. And believe it or not, she sang as a soprano and as a mezzo and as a contralto. She sang all three. But anyway, Portia came to our home and sang there when our home in Wolfville, and sang at 52 University Avenue for us, and at that time the president of the university and the dean of theology were special guests to hear Portia, and it was just a wonderful night. So then some of Portia's other brothers and sisters, like Lauren White, was on Sing Along Jubilee, and there's a long list of Olivers and Whites who are musical. And so my sister Jeannie played the violin, Shirley played the piano, Nancy played guitar, and David played guitar. You know, so we all had musical instruments that we played, and I did drums and other things in addition to the trumpet. But the trumpet is what I kind of excelled in and really loved.
I've seen some great pictures of you playing the trumpet. And a quick question for you: is your mom's name, was it pronounced Helena or Helena?
Helena.
Helena. Dr. Ricketts, we're coming to you in just one moment. I do have a question that has popped up in the chat function, and I will share with you, Dr. Oliver, that it comes from Fakayo, who was one of the three on the panel that you spoke of, that you watched earlier today. So Fakayo says, thank you, Dr. Oliver. My question for you is, what is your advice to Black youth who advocate for equality and start to grow tired of continued ignorance? What do we do when passion does not suffice?
Well, I like the fact that you have a Black association at Acadia, and it's wonderful to meet as a Black family, and that is so very, very important. And you can become energized and get new spirits from that. And it's important as well, never ever to forget your history and your background. Tell stories to everyone about your backgrounds and your family and your forefathers and parents, because that will strengthen it as well. But family is the key. Family is the key to me. And most of the things that I was able to do, and if I had any success, it's because of the training I got from my mother and father, and neither of whom had a university degree, but instilled in me some and my brothers and sisters, some wonderful principles of hard work and respecting the dignity of the person, and so on. And I would not be here today if it weren't for my mother and father.
Thank you for that. So Fakayo family, whether it be your biological family or your family of students who are with you here at Acadia, and also allies, that allyship that we spoke of. So thank you for that. Dr. Ricketts, if you are still with us, would you care to join us? Hello, sir. Good evening.
I think I'm back.
Well, I will pass it over to you, Dr. Ricketts, to share some words of reaction to the words of Dr. Oliver this evening.
Well, thank you, Una. Thank you, everybody, for being part of this evening. Dr. Oliver, thank you so much. What a pleasure, what an honor to have you with us today, and what a way to wrap up Black History Month and African Heritage Month here in Nova Scotia. It's been truly wonderful to listen to your stories and also to reflect on your writings as well in your book and how this has all come together. And thank you so much for gracing Acadia University with your presence, and also thank you for being a student at Acadia all those years ago. I know it was just across the street, but I bet it was I bet there was some barriers even on that street for you to make that crossing. And thank you for doing that, and for being such a trailblazer for all of us, but of course especially for Black Canadians, and particularly today an inspiration to our Black students and Black members of our community. A couple of things. I don't have too many minutes, and I do sometimes tend to speak a bit too long, as our university presidents want to do. But so I do want to keep my remarks very short. But you mentioned a couple of things that I think were really important. You talked about your family DNA, education, education, education. And so how relevant, of course, that is for all of us here tonight and at Acadia University. And of course, it always makes one realize that education is a tremendous power for good, but of course it can also be a power for oppression and a power for wrong. And I was reminded as you said that about a fellow senator, Senator Murray Sinclair, in the Truth and Reconciliation report, when he talked about that education had got us into this mess. And I think it's something sobering for those of us in education to make sure that we are constantly challenging, that we are using our privileged status as educators for good, and not for the perpetuation of injustices and intolerances, because we may not actually even recognize that we're doing it. But of course, the other piece that Senator Sinclair said was that only education can get us out of it. And that's the key. Education can get us out of it. And the other piece of that also is that just as truth and reconciliation is a path traveled together, so is the path towards anti-racism and inclusion. And again, I loved your challenge to us tonight, because when you were asked about that, you drove right into the heart of what every single human being, every single individual listening to you tonight and watching you can do, right? You drove right into the heart of it. Sit down, listen, talk to people, sit down with Black people, sit down with people, Indigenous people different from yourself, sit down and listen to them, learn from them, get to know them. Because if you get to know somebody, that is how you build family. That's how you build relationships, and that's how you build community. And I think, sometimes people might say, oh, well, that's easy, that's easy, anybody can do that, but people don't do it. And so I think that's an amazing message that you've given tonight, because nobody can say to you, well, I'm sorry, I can't do that. That's too tough for me. It's too big a challenge. It's too big a problem. I can't solve it. Well, you've just said, yes, you can. You can solve it. So thank you for doing that. And so with the Obama quote there, but I think that's relevant, when he said, yes, you can do this, and it is your responsibility to do it. And when you talked about that, it reminded me of one of my favorite quotes. I actually used this quote in my matriculation address at the beginning of this academic year. And it's a quote by Walt Whitman when he says, "Be curious, not judgmental." And I just love that quote. It's very short, but when you think about it, it is so poignant. And I think it speaks to what you've just challenged us all to do. Because when you think of the Acadia community, we come to Acadia from all different parts, from all over, sometimes around the corner, sometimes, the next village, or across the province, across Canada, around the world. Our students come from everywhere. And every one of us, each and every one of us, brings our own experiences, but our own prejudices, our own biases. We're molded by the way we were brought up. And to me, the university is the opportunity for you to open that up and step outside of that. And that's why I love that quote of be curious, not judgmental, because our biases and our experiences and our prejudices drive us to make judgments. And what we should do is say, no, let's be curious. Let's find out about somebody before I decide what I think they are and make judgments about them. Let's sit down. It goes back to your conversation. Sit down and have that conversation and get to know each other. One of the most powerful things, Una mentioned at the beginning that we had the president's anti-racism task force. And, you know, one of the most powerful things that happened in that task force, and I think it was powerful for everybody, but I think it was really powerful for the white people on that task force, including myself, was to listen to our students. Fakeo was one of them, but listen to us. They listened to our Black students, our Indigenous students, speak from the heart about their experiences. And it was an eye-opener. It brought tears to people's eyes. And I think it was shocking to people. And I think, you know, that is the kind of openness that we need to realize that, you know, other people's pain is real. And we have to understand it and open ourselves to it so that we can join with people to work together for a much, much better world and certainly a better Acadia. So I want to thank you so much for all you've done in your life, but particularly for continuing to keep Acadia as, you know, as something important to you, and to keep helping us and guiding us as we continue this journey, which is a journey walked together. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those very kind words.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Ricketts, and thank you so much for reiterating that education is what's going to get us out of this, and reiterating sitting down and listening. And there's a big difference between hearing and listening. So I would add into that, sit down and listen and talk, and I would add to that and say, be quiet, be quiet and listen. Pretty key piece of it. So thank you both for that. Dr. Oliver, I'm sure you're not going to be surprised to hear that we have a copy of your book that we are giving away for our draw prize this evening. And our draw prize winner is Ruth Ann Nicholson, whom I understand is on the call this evening. So Ruth Ann, we will be reaching out to you to get your copy of A Matter of Equality into your hands, written, of course, by our guest here this evening, Dr. Oliver. Our next virtual event, folks, is next Monday night, March 7th. I'm getting ahead of myself. And we have a panel for our hockey that's coming up in March, our U Cup, with former and current Axemen hockey captains and Amy Walsh, Executive Director of Hockey Nova Scotia. So look forward to seeing you next Monday night for that one. Dr. Oliver, thank you again for your time, your commitment, your passion. It's been so wonderful to chat with you. I do hope that we continue to keep ties with one another. Now that I know you and have a connection with you, I certainly hope that you won't mind me reaching out on occasion to check in and say hello. I understand you're at your firm today, and I hope you're enjoying yourself on this final day of African Heritage Month, Black History Month here in Nova Scotia. Thank you to everyone who joined us here this evening, and take care, everyone. Stay safe, be optimistic, be change agents, and let's keep affecting change where and when we know we need to.